Good afternoon. Happy to see you here in Ukrinform. Olga Timanova is with you. 3 months the war lasts, and I want, on behalf of all my team, to thank the journalist community for your work. Because it's because of you the world knows the truth. The world knows about the Russian aggression and about heroic resistance of Ukrainian nation. Briefly about our agenda, at 1:30, Deputy Head of Minister of Ukraine, Hanna Miller, will join us. Andriy Ostrovsky, that's the Head of Strategic Communications Department at the Office of Commander-in-Chief of Armed Forces of Ukraine, and also Vyacheslav Ryevsky. Our colleagues will present the study project on conducting war by Ukrainian army. At 3:30, Andriy Ko will come here, First Deputy Head of Ukraine State Agency of Army Road, and we will talk about the renewal of our infrastructure. And right now we have Oleh Ustenko, Economic Advisor to the President of Ukraine, and we'll talk about economic plan of Ukraine's recovery. Please. Good afternoon. Also, very grateful for you that you cover these news that happen in Ukraine, and that you show the truthful information, and that you convey to your readers and viewers regarding the military aggression. I would like to say that just the second or third day after the start of the aggression, the President of Ukraine have set a clear task to plan the renewal of Ukraine. Why it is important? We all understand that how this process has to be conducted. We have to solve the two equations. First equation is the assets, the money, where to get the money, what losses we have received. What losses we have, that's the first thing. And second is where we can find the funds for that. And second equation that we have to solve is regarding the directions of use of that funds to renew Ukrainian economy. Of course, we suffer from this harsh aggression. It's clearly understandable that everything that was planned before, and when we were in this peaceful time, it was all altered and changed after we have moved to the martial law, to the period of the aggression. The first week of the start of the war, the aggressor was destroying our assets quite fast. And after the first week of the war, our losses just by assets alone were roughly about $100 billion. After that, the cost of destruction was increasing rapidly, quite rapidly. And now we're talking about direct losses of our assets roughly about $650 billion. $650 billion. It's direct losses of our assets. If you look at that figure in the complex, you can see that there are also indirect collateral loss that we also receive. Underinvested assets, underinvested funds, unreceived GDP. This year, we planned that our growth will be on the level of about 4.5%, which would amount to about $10 billion. Plus to our GDP. But in fact, we have a drop. With those collateral losses, we can say that the full cost that has to be reimbursed for Ukraine is roughly about $1 trillion. 650 billion is direct losses, including the collateral losses. It's about $1 trillion. Where do we get that money? You know, right now the consultancies are conducted, but there is a clear understanding. First and main thing, the aggressor must pay. Each hryvnia, each cent has to pay for the damage the aggressor causes. Where can we get that compensation from aggressor? First is the frozen assets of Central Bank of Russian Federation. This amounts to about $350 billion. How we have to conduct it, how we have to make this, taking this money and transfer it to the Fund of Renewal of Ukraine, because the fund has been formed for renewal of Ukraine. You understand, when we're speaking about assets of central banks, they're spread, they're disseminated among several countries. Mostly we're speaking about so-called great G7 countries. And on G7 countries, they're disseminated. A part in the US, a part in the EU, a part in Japan, of those arrested assets. And there are consultancies going on regarding how practically the changes will be done to the national legislations of those according countries where the funds are right now, the funds of Central Bank of Russian Federation. And after the changes in the local legislation, those funds will be transferred to the Foundation of Renewal of Ukraine, $350 billion. Then we're speaking about so-called arrested assets of commodities, of Russian commodities, from nomenclature, that were moved from Russian Federation territory and that are now arrested. Its amounts about $150 billion. Well, that's not a total amount that will be subject to transfer to the Foundation of Renewal of Ukraine. There are additional assets that were moved from Russian Federation's territory during a long period of time. And according to different evaluation, we're speaking about several hundreds billions of dollars that are hidden around the world, that are now, right now, that are being tracked by several big groups that specialize on that format of searching for assets. As soon as those assets are found, they'll be arrested, and we will be able to talk about more precise figures. What is the economy behind this, economic logic? It's right now we're talking about plants and factories and all, apartments, buildings, and houses around the world that could be arrested or are arrested. This would all be accumulated into one big so-called basket. And we know that this basket is either made or will be made. And we will know a rough amount for this basket. One thing is to have the funds to renew the Ukraine, and the other thing is to have the assets as houses or factories. We'll know the cost of this basket, and against this basket, the certain debt vexels will be, debt papers will be signed that will be sold on the international financial market, those debt papers. In this case, the guarantees of payments will be assets in this basket. So for them, we'll write the debt papers that will be sold on the international financial market. After that, we will be able to involve the funds to the basket of renewal of Ukraine. And the basket will be sustained as it is currently. After that, there will be an opportunity to receive the funds directly to the Fund of Renewal, to Foundation of Renewal of Ukraine. We're speaking about $350 of Central Bank of Russian Federation. Also, additionally, 150 billion from arrested assets that are arrested already of Russia. So right now, this amounts about $500 billion. And additional means that are taken will allow us additionally fill this basket with additional resources. Why it is important to go via the operation of those issuing those debt papers? Because we need actual funds. We can wait for a certain period of time until we implement, until we sell the assets and pay to those who bought those debt papers, debt stocks. But the actual funds could be immediately used by this, immediately transferred to this Foundation of Renewal of Ukraine. And additionally, to renew Ukraine, we could use also other resources. Speaking of non-Russian or resources of Russian origin, those are resources of the EU, of the US. You heard the announcement of the G7 and directly from the White House, and also the ones of the EU regarding support from the standpoint of renewal of Ukraine, reconstruction of Ukraine, how Ukraine will be reconstructed. Right now, several working groups are working on it that are elaborating several plans regarding renewal of Ukraine. It will all be centralized, and from one single center, this one single center will issue a plan to renew Ukraine, and the position of the President Zelensky is not only clear, but it's very strict on how we should renew Ukraine. Number one, it's full compensation of all the losses that Ukraine suffered. Secondly, all that's relevant to renewal of social infrastructure and housing, it has to be conducted in a very short period of time. Which means that a part, speaking of renewal of houses, apartment buildings, a part of the funds will be used for the internal consumption, meaning to support our own construction in Ukraine. But clearly, after a lot of residential area was destroyed, people don't have anywhere to don't have, even though they now have shelters. We would want, and they want their apartments to be built again, rebuilt. And right now, we're considering opportunities regarding procurements of a part of construction materials outside of Ukraine, just to speed up this process. Also, the rest of the plans are considered regarding renovation, starting from infrastructure, from railway infrastructure. Our logistics is changed, partially is destroyed, partially we just are unable to use it in the conditions that are. In general, we understand that the trade with our aggressive neighbor will never be renewed. What is the sense for us, for instance, for Ukrainian railways, to speak about a compensation of losses there? Is there a sense for us to have the railway of the size that we have? Or we need to change the size of the railway to the system that right now exists in the EU, just to change the distance of the railway size, the width of the railway sides, meaning. Regarding the apartment buildings, there is also a question. When we will renovate, when we will rebuild, we won't have to rebuild it as it was. Especially we speak about big multi-apartment buildings, multi-story buildings. We can build them not only with new technologies, but we can build them basing that it's better, it's energy efficient technologies in those new apartment buildings for our Ukrainian citizens. Same is relevant for the enterprises. There is no point to rebuild the enterprise with the same technology that it used to have. We can rebuild it with advanced technologies on a newer level that will allow us the opportunity to actively develop the country in the future. That's speaking in general. If it's just a vision on how those processes should take place, what figures we're talking about. And I would like to reiterate that the position of the President Zelensky is clear and very strict. The aggressor must pay each cent, each dollar, each cent that for what was destroyed in Ukraine, each hryvnia and each kopek. It has to be compensated in a short period of time. And this compensation and reconstruction has to be conducted on the newer, on a higher technical level. Thank you. Thank you. In April, a National Council regarding renovation was created. What are the first tasks that it has? Well, as I've mentioned, the first tasks are just solving those two equations, as I've mentioned. The funds, forming this foundation, and the direction of use of those funds. And about directions we have discussed. They start working quite efficiently, and it's an ongoing work. And it's not a single group, I must say. There are many advisory groups that are working on this direction. I know at least 10 similar groups that work. You know that for President Zelensky, he discusses this issue also with the international meetings, international meetings. So it's on a constant control of the President of Ukraine. Speaking of the second group of support, where our efforts are aimed at, so it's the support that we will not return. It's just we're not speaking about Russian money. Yes, all that's about our debt policy and also about the policy on renovation of Ukraine. Yes, of course, we receive now grant money, the money that we won't have to return, but also we receive credit resources. Regarding the policy that overall the debt policy of the state, we try to do everything possible to increase the share of grant money, meaning those that are not to be returned and they will not pay the percentage of it, to decrease the part of the debt money that has two main characteristics. We have to return them, we have to pay percentage of them. In other words, in general, speaking of debt policy, the trend is more grant money and decreasing the part of debt resource. And regarding the policy on renovation, it's not about using debts at all. It's only about grants. And there is an understanding about the figures. You have to understand that we're speaking about 1 trillion of losses for Ukraine, direct and collateral, means that that's our 5 GDPs of Ukraine per year. Last year, in 2021, we received the historically maximal GDP in Ukraine since the independence. It was about a little less than $200 billion. So it's our GDP for 5 years, that $1 trillion. So naturally, in order to renovate the country, in this case, we cannot even imagine that we can do it for debts, or borrowing money. No, we can talk only about the money taken from Russian Federation and involving the money of our allies and partners also. Dear colleagues, your questions. Valentin Ukrinform. To what amount of Russian assets are now in Ukraine and how they will be aimed at renovation of Ukraine? Speaking of the big picture overall, what is in Ukraine, we're speaking about several percents of what will be involved from Russian Federation, just a few percent. The funds that are now, the assets of Russian Federation here in Ukraine, you know, they are now arrested, and the issue is considered of their of sales of those assets. And as an economist, I have a question on when it will be possible to sell them, because the assets that are outside of Ukraine, it's a clearer picture and economical logic for making those debt papers. It's all in the basket. Against the basket, you issue those papers, you sell them. Those debt stocks, you have the basket, you transfer the money to the Foundation for Innovation of Ukraine, and then you just sell those assets that you have just to cover the debts for those who bought the papers. That's the economy logic. In Ukraine, there is this basket, yes, but the moment of sales is not the best, is not the most profitable. We understand why. We understand we have the assets. What is the cost of them? What should we say about the cost? The one that we had before 24th of February, or the one that we have now? Because right now it will be a lot less, and you will not. It will not be able to find the buyer that will be able to pay for it as much money as it costed before 24th of February. So to say the exact price, exact amount that those assets cost, I cannot. Just to understand the amount, it's just about a few percent of the Russian assets, next to the $500 billion that are tracked and arrested, yes, of Russian Federation. Thank you. More questions?
Yes. And my name is Nicolas Corrovered. I'm a journalist for B2. This is a French and European media and based in Brussels this morning. I just want to have a question on the question of the waste of money, because we know this was a problem in the past with a lot of subsidies grant from international funds or European funds. They wasted in corruption, and sometimes they don't arrive to the project. How do you do now to avoid this problem? Because if 50%, for example, is waste in that, maybe it is not. It is prevents some intention of the donator to do that, to give money. Thanks very much.
Мені треба перекласти це питання, що всі розуміють його, да? Тобто питання йде з приводу того, що
question is that the French colleagues is interested in regarding corruption risks that are possibly in Ukraine, and says that there were times when almost 50% of grant money were, as far as I understand, just stolen. Working over 30 years in economical policy, even I never saw the figure of 50%. Maybe you know better, but speaking of 50%, I think there was a misunderstanding of some data. When you speak about 50%, it was just the only. It was 50%. There was the only time when I saw it. It was the level of shade economy of Ukraine, But there was 54%. But that's a different thing. But regarding corruption, there was not even close to that figure. There were a lot less. But this is a clear question and very relevant, of course. First, we have to understand that Ukraine is fully changed now. The war changed it all. Deaths of our people just changed it all. No one will not allow, first, I mean also the civil society, to have that corruption, especially the high corruption that you're speaking about, for it to exist after the war. That's the first thing. The second prevention from it, that we're sure that it won't be corruption. Yes, we had corruption. It was high corruption. And even in these difficult times, we heard different corruption schemes that were done in the previous years in Ukraine. But when Ukraine becomes the member of candidate of the EU, it's one of the preventive measures granting on which we can say with 100% guarantee that corruption will be fully overcame by civil society, firstly, and by the European track that will allow not only minimize corruption, but decrease it to the level of no more than the one of the European Union. If you recall the experience of joining to the EU by Bulgaria, Romania, for instance, I don't remember how many years ago, how many decades ago that was, maybe 15 years ago, yes? If you recall their experience, you can recall that both Bulgaria and Romania, for them, there was a delay to join the EU, even regardless that they were the candidate countries, by a year. Why? Because they had big problems, huge problems with other countries on corruption and what's called organized crime. And those problems were solved. Those two preventive mechanisms will allow us to surely say that we will not have corruption. Also, please add that when we're speaking about the European track, and it's actually the track that has to be there, and it will be involved from the standpoint of renewal of Ukraine, it's clear that the one who pays the money has all the opportunities to fully check and have the access to all that, to track each euro that is spent here in Ukraine on those programs. And it's a sustainable practice. We don't have to, the EU don't have to invent the wheel here. Nor Ukraine has to invent the wheel here. It's a sustainable practice. We just have to cooperate here. And that's it. And this will allow the opportunity to greatly decrease the corruption. And I can say that the country now and the country before 24th of February, they're different. They are different also in a sense that no one in the civil society will tolerate even minimal corruption. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us. I'll recall was Oleh Ustenko with us, advisor to the President of Ukraine on economical issues. I say that in 5 minutes there'll be a presentation of the training program on the rules of conducting of